Read that New York Times report that details a profanity-laced phone call between Trump and the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell earlier this month. NBC News has not yet confirmed the report, which says that during the call initiated by Trump on August 9th from his New Jersey golf club, the president accused McConnell of bungling the health care issue. And according to the Times, Republican sources briefed on the conversation say Trump was even more animated about the Senate leader's refusal to protect him from investigations of Russian interference in the 2016 election. A reporter for CNN tweeted that sources told him Trump blew up and swore at McConnell, and not just the Russia probe, but also the Russia sanctions bill that overwhelmingly passed Congress and Trump signed early this month. According to the Times, McConnell has fumed over Trump's regular threats against fellow Republicans and criticism of Senate rules. He questioned Trump's understanding of the presidency in a public speech. McConnell has made sharper comments in private, describing Trump as entirely unwilling to learn the basics of governing. McConnell has mused about whether Trump will be in a position to lead the Republican Party into next year's elections and beyond, according to people who've spoken to him directly. And this from Billy Piper, a lobbyist and former McConnell chief of staff, who says, quote, the quickest way for him to get impeached is for Trump to knock off Jeff Flake and Dean Heller and be faced with a Democrat-led Senate. McConnell spokesperson says the senator and president, quote, have a lot of shared goals, including tax reform, infrastructure, funding the government, not defaulting on the debt, and passing the defense authorization bill. Joe.
Yeah, you know, Jim Vandehei, I usually will tell administrations that are coming in that have a that are in the majority. I'll say, you know, the most important person for you to get along with is the Senate Minority Leader. In this case, it should be Chuck Schumer, but that always assumes that you're going to get along with the Senate Majority Leader who is in your own party. And again, you know, we've been doing this for a very long time. When we were much younger, we you know, would be milling around the Speaker's lobby, and this is basic stuff. I mean, this is not hard. If you want to pass bills, you have to persuade legislators. If you want to persuade legislators, you don't actively insult them. If you have 49 votes and you need one more vote, you don't insult the man that has the one vote you need. You don't insult Jeff Flake. You don't insult Mitch McConnell. This is basic stuff, and yet the president can't seem to grasp this basic stuff. And it should be his own supporters that are more concerned about this than even the media, because he's not going to get anything done acting this way.
Well, and also it's Mitch McConnell. Here's a guy who never really criticized Donald Trump, who tried to push through his health care bill, who basically supports every dimension of the Trump agenda. And so this idea, you've been talking throughout the program about all these self-inflicted wounds that are totally unnecessary. And he really has alienated himself. And it is linked, I think, down the road to the Mueller probe. At some point, he knows he's going to need people to have his back. There's nobody in town, and increasingly not even anybody on his staff, who ultimately will have his back if Mueller acts, if he goes after him on obstruction of justice, because it's not he was just talking to McConnell about the Russia probe. He was talking to everybody from his driver to anyone serving him food. He would talk about it to anybody. And if Mueller looks at what happened with Comey, and if he looks at what happened with his conversations with other members of his cabinet, looks at what he said with people who had control over the probes in Russia, and comes to the conclusion that that constitutes obstruction of justice, he's in a hell of a lot of trouble. And so there again, he didn't need to do any of that. And so every day we come on this program, we just keep saying, oh my God, I can't believe he didn't do that. He did that again. What he did in that speech last night to the media was despicable. We might be numb to it, but to say that the media is un-American, to say that they don't like the American heritage and that they're trying to take it away, and saying that to a bunch of people who are angry about the direction of the country, he's playing with fire. And when someone gets hurt because of the words that he says and the provocations that he makes, that's on him.
The blood is if something happens to a reporter, the blood is completely on Donald Trump's hands. He's trying to whip his followers into a fury, and you're exactly right. We should never grow numb to that fact. Heidi, going back to the Mitch McConnell story, if you talk to old hands in the United States Senate, Democrats and Republicans, they will tell you actually that what Mitch McConnell was able to do in pulling together 49 votes on a health care bill that only 17% of Americans supported after the president had thrown Republican House members under the bus and showed that he had absolutely no loyalty to anybody that stuck their neck out for them, was pretty incredible. That McConnell could get 49 votes for that bad of a bill.
And it's not just
he's an open... Yeah, I'm just saying he's now in open warfare, again, with the most powerful guy on Capitol Hill, who actually carried his water without complaining on the health care bill and almost did the impossible.
And not complaining, even though it wasn't just a bad bill, Joe. The president himself helped undermine the process by, if you remember, calling the bill mean, by going after, retaliating as well, you know, sicking his Interior Department on Senator Murkowski. So just think like you are Mitch McConnell for a moment. Think about the attacks on your members. Think about the fact that you now have such a narrow path for moving any type of legislation after the failure of health care. And Joe, based on my own reporting, the moment when I think Mitch McConnell realized that this is kind of the end of the road in terms of getting anything done with this president was Charlottesville. Based on my own reporting, he was just beside himself after that night when Trump responded the way that he did to Charlottesville, and knew that, look, if this president may be taking himself down politically, but he's going to take down our party politically as well. And I think that is why there's no mistaking that you are seeing these sources speaking so freely to our newspaper, to the New York Times, about the situation right now. And there's also a personal dimension to this, Joe. Based on my reporting, McConnell was very upset that his wife was also dragged into this, standing next to the president at that moment during that news conference, which was originally supposed to be about transportation.
So you've got a bit of a counterpoint, Nick Confessor. You may be in the minority here.
Look, I think the assumption around this table and in Washington is that the ultimate aspiration of a president is to pass policy. I think that's wrong for this president. I think his presidency is a theater of revenge and rage against enemies. And that is what he delivers to his constituents and those people in that rallying hall. It's not a trade policy. It's on any policy. It's the posture and the performance of punishing the people that they hate. Now, it's dangerous and it's toxic, but I'm not sure it's not what they don't want to get, which is totally unlike any past president. And again, if your job is to pass tax reform, it's not going to happen this way. But if your job is to feel that anger and to reflect it back to those people, he's very, very good at that, unfortunately for the country, I think.
Well, to Nick's point, Steve, Donald Trump didn't understand what was exactly in the repeal and replace proposal before the Senate. He just wanted to get a win on it. I mean, it's even in this McConnell piece in the New York Times that the Republicans were frustrated he wasn't involved and he had no familiarity with what was inside the bill. He just wanted a victory. That's why he held that Rose Garden rally when it passed the House. It wasn't law. It just passed the House.
He'll take the win if he can get it, but if he can't get the win, he's not going to do the traditional things presidents do. And I think there's some political realities here we got to talk about. We're talking about how can he do this to Mitch McConnell. Well, in the court of public opinion, have you seen a poll about Mitch McConnell? Have you seen a poll about Mitch McConnell in his home state? Toxically unpopular. So this whole idea, of the swamp that Donald Trump ran against last year, there is an aspect here of sort of fighting against it. And I just think the one cautionary thing, I agree with what Nick said. I think we have a very good handle about the legislative reality of this presidency. And I think everything that's being said here about Donald Trump sort of not being able to get anything done legislatively is absolutely spot on. I don't think we necessarily have as good a handle as we may think we do on how this is breaking in terms of public opinion.
But Steve Kornacki, that's exactly what Donald Trump doesn't understand. Mitch McConnell doesn't care. Mitch McConnell isn't looking at his approval ratings in Kentucky 4 years before he goes back and runs for re-election in a state in 2020 that he's been elected in since the 1980s, before Donald Trump even wrote Art of the Deal, before Donald Trump even went bankrupt, before Donald Trump. Mitch McConnell is going to be just fine. And that's what presidents, not just this president, he's the worst example of it, but that's what presidents for 200 years have thought when they've come into Washington. They think, I figured out how to crack this code. I'm the smartest guy that's ever been in the White House before. I'm going to show everybody how it's done.
Right, but
and
I
they get beaten down. And they learn that people like Mitch McConnell is going to wait them out. Because Mitch is going to be in Washington, D.C. a lot longer than Donald Trump is. Write it down. He will.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree on the history of it. I mean, obviously, the example you think of is Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter thought he could roll over Tip O'Neill and the Democrats, and Jimmy Carter found out otherwise. But I think Nick raised a really crucial point there about the fundamental nature of this presidency being different than every presidency that came before. And I think it's a bigger topic of conversation. But I think Donald Trump as a candidate and Donald Trump as a president, in a way we haven't seen before, these are not battles that really are about Capitol Hill. They're not battles that are about Mitch McConnell and lining up votes. They are battles about culture. They're battles about American culture, about a vast divide. And it's the one thing I don't think we fully have a handle on. It's the one thing I have this nagging feeling that the polls that we look at every day when we say 36% today, 38%, 34%, I don't think they're necessarily capturing the reality of that divide when it becomes a choice between Donald Trump and the Democrats, or Donald Trump and the media, or Donald Trump and liberal culture. I don't think we necessarily know how that breaks, and I think that's the great wild card. Not anything. I agree with you totally on legislation. He's not getting anything through the way he's behaving, but it's that divide.
Right, but right now that divide, Willie, it's a binary divide, and people are still thinking, if I don't support Donald Trump, then that means I'm supporting the media, or that means I'm supporting Nancy Pelosi, or that means I'm supporting Hillary Clinton, or that means I'm supporting Bernie Sanders, or that means I'm supporting Black Lives Matters, or that means I'm supporting liberals on college campuses. That's where the mindset is right now. What happens when a real conservative who's tough, that will take it to Donald Trump, runs against him in a primary election? It completely changes that choice. One other thing, too, that's very important to remember. Donald Trump may be at 34, 35, 36%, and yes, he may whip these crowds into a frenzy who just want to feed on resentment. But I'll tell you who he's not going to whip into a frenzy and who's not going to go along with him. Those are fundraisers and a lot of mainstream Republicans who are saying, you know what, I'm going to stick it out with this guy because not only am I going to get a Supreme Court justice that I want, I'm going to get tax reform. I'm going to get regulatory reform. I'm going to get health care reform, and the type of health care reform that's going to depend more on the free market than it is on government intervention. I'm going to get immigration reform that's sensible, that focuses more on getting high-skilled immigrants into this country instead of low-skilled immigrants into this country. A lot of people are thinking like that. The second they realize that Donald Trump doesn't give a damn about passing their agenda, that 36% becomes 32%, becomes 31%. And good luck finding people that are going to contribute to Donald Trump if he's not going to pass their agenda. And that's what it's looking like this morning, that he is running a perpetual grievance machine and doesn't really give a damn about whether he passes tax reform or anything else.
Well, and a lot of people who voted for him, Megan, held their noses because they thought he was a deal maker. They thought he could actually come in and flip over the tables in Washington and change the culture and get things done, which is, you know, the sort of naive notion that a lot of presidents have had coming in. But I think Donald Trump even more than anybody else. People I know who voted for him and said, I don't like all the personal stuff. I don't like some of the stuff he says, but he's different. He's going to shake things up. He's going to change Washington. None of that has happened. In fact, his posture toward Congress has been the opposite of that. It's been the antithesis of a deal maker. Berating senators and putting them in a corner is not the way to get things done.
Yeah, I mean, he's changed Washington, just not quite in the way that many of us expected, I think, in him coming in. And I think that's why Nick's point is so profound. He is using the presidency as entertainment, as a bully pulpit, as this theater of rage and revenge. That is completely at odds with an establishment, Republicans, you call them mainstream Republicans, call them what you will, who are most vested in things like immigration reform, particularly tax reform, pushing through things that are at the heart of that conservative agenda and have been at that heart of the conservative agenda for so long. But I do think we're going to have to see what happens when we come back this fall. Are people really going to desert him in droves? Are people really going to make this fundamental break and give up these long-held legislative objectives which have animated the party for so long? Who is going to stand up to him truly in public? Is Mitch McConnell going to put everything we see in that New York Times article on the record and stand up in front of people and say that's how he really feels? Is Paul Ryan going to do that? Are they going to sacrifice the attempts to do that, to push through tax reform? I'm not so sure that coming back this fall we're going to see this courageous Republican Party stand up as they have so far failed to do.
You know, Jim Vandehei, Joe was talking about principled conservatives standing up and being next to Donald Trump and giving people a choice there. Someone like John Kasich, who's flirted with the idea, or people around him have flirted with the idea of a primary. We've been through this. Donald Trump went up against Jeb Bush and other principled conservatives, and if you look at polling today, it's early, I know, but he still beats those people by 30 and 40 points. He still enjoys 80% support among Republicans. So I think those are the numbers he's looking at when he gets up on a stage and talks the way he talked last night. He feels like his people are still with him.
Yeah, I think Kornacki nailed it. If you take like a clear-eyed look at the numbers, Republicans are with him on what to do with these statues that are getting torn down. They're with him in terms of his response to what happened in Charlottesville. They're with him in terms of should you blame Congress more than you blame Trump. And so, yes, there's been some erosion in his numbers, but it's still a small erosion, and that base loves him. And there was that poll last week that said basically there's nothing that Trump could do to lose probably 2/3 of his supporters, and that's why he's never going to drop below 35, never go above 44, and why he himself will never change it. I don't think that the supporters are going to change it. They love the rage at the machine. They love the rage at the media. They love the fact that we hyperventilate in response to it. They love his provocations with North Korea. They love the tough talk about trade wars. They don't get all spooled up about the nitty-gritty of whether anything's getting done. And then they listened to Donald Trump last night declare that in the history of our fine country